So you all generally did pretty good on the exam on kind of analyzing stuff with our resistance training program. You do pretty well on your resistance training program fatigue. Okay? But the fit principles are the same. We apply them in essentially the same manner to an aerobic training program as we would to resistance training. Okay? So you guys did this in class. I think on last Monday we kind of did our what would your workout be, but frequency is still number of days per week, 2 days, 3 days, 0 days, whatever that's going to be. Intensity is really, really going to be the thing that we have to push. Intensity is a percentage of VO2 max, okay? That's how we're going to quantify aerobic exercise intensity. It's a percentage of VO2 max, okay? So, Hallie, do you remember, can we measure VO2 max easily if you wanted to go run today? Is there an easy way for us to kind of know what your VO2 max is before you went today? Right, so we would use heart rate, right? Because it's difficult for us to know what your VO2 max is. We can use your heart rate during exercise as our way to check and prescribe intensity. So when you look at the program that you're going to find for your fatigue, you're going to be looking to see, are they saying run at 60 or 70 or 50% of VO2 max? They're probably not going to say that. Okay? In the absence of that, though, they might say something about a percentage of heart rate reserve. You guys remember that heart rate reserve is the number of beats per minute in heart rate that you have between your resting heart rate and your age predicted max heart rate. Okay? And so you take a percentage of that range and then add that number back onto your resting heart rate, and that will give you a target heart rate during exercise that will very closely approximate the same percentage of VO2 max. So for most of us, we need to be 60, 70, 80% of heart rate reserve for some period of time in order to evoke training adaptations that will increase our VO2 max. So that's how we're going to quantify intensity, okay? Much like with resistance training, you're going to look for a program, and this is the one area that people do a very, very lousy job of trying to be very explicit with when they tell you to go run. They're going to say, go run at what is a comfortable pace. Well, who the hell knows what that is, right? That's not helpful, right? I can, we can ask Taylor to go run at something comfortable, but that may not be enough. We don't know, like whatever she thinks is comfortable may not be at a high enough range. What I think is comfortable is walking, right? Going very slow where I'm not going to evoke adaptations is, is comfortable to me. We can all generally run a little faster than we would like if we're just willing to tolerate a little bit of uncomfortableness. So that's frequency, intensity. Time is easy, it's just duration. Unlike trying to calculate sets and reps and those kinds of things, with aerobic training, time really is just minutes, basically. Okay? And then type is it running? Is it walking? Is it cycling? Is it elliptical? Okay? It's kind of whatever the modality is going to be. Kelly, you had a question.
If they say like the RPE, would that be the intensity?
People will oftentimes, for intensity, tell you to use RPE, the rating of perceived exertion, right? And they may have that as a 0 to 10 RPE scale, as we talked about before, or it should more properly be the 6 to 20 RPE scale, where they're going to say pick something that is somewhat hard, or right? Like it's a 5 out of 10, right? And that's better than nothing. That's better than nothing, okay? Like, given the ability for most people to get some estimate of their heart rate, that's going to be an even better way to do it. Okay? Okay. So to try to overload and then to progressively overload and to kind of hit specificity, right? Remember that overload is just doing more than whatever it is that you're accustomed to doing, okay? Whatever you're accustomed to. Whatever Samantha's used to doing, do more. If you're used to doing 3 days a week for half an hour, you can do 4 days per week for half an hour, and that might get you overload. Or you could stay at 3 days per week and do 35 minutes or 40 minutes, and that would get you overload. Or it could be still 3 days, still 30 minutes, but if you've been going at, say, 60% of heart rate reserve, now go at 70%, okay? We can overload by going for a longer period of time, by doing an additional day per week, or by increasing the intensity. So we can do some combination of all 3 of these things, okay? And if you really want to get into how to program in people, when you switch one of these, you want to leave the other ones the same. You wouldn't want to go, I'm going to go up in intensity and up in duration and up in frequency all in the same week. That seems a little bit crazy. But you would do one of those, okay? So as we do this, as we increase these, that will help us get some overload, which will potentially be good from an increase in VO2 max. Again, progressive overload is this simple idea that as we do this for a little while, it's going to become easier for us. And so then as it becomes easier, we need to then go back and increase one of these things again. Okay? That's again the virtue of using percentage of VO2 max or percentage of heart rate max or percentage of heart rate reserve to quantify intensity. As you become more fit, your resting heart rate falls. And so you can maintain 70% of heart rate reserve all the time. If you keep rechecking your resting heart rate, then it's going to take a faster and faster running pace or a higher power output on the bike to maintain that percentage of heart rate reserve. And so that's going to build in some level of progressive overload. So specificity with aerobic exercise is much like it is with resistance. You get better at whatever it is that you do, okay? You get better at whatever you're doing. Where this becomes very tricky and is a little bit difficult to understand, my father still has a hard time with this. We've been arguing about this for 20 years, okay? So changes in VO2 max are very specific once you reach a certain level of fitness to how you're training. So what I mean by this is, if you are a runner, you're going to train by running, your VO2 max during running is going to go up. Your VO2 max during cycling may not go up. Your VO2 max, if we put you on elliptical, may not go up, okay? And so in people that are very, very unfit, they have a very low VO2 max, any kind of thing is going to make their VO2 max go up. You take a person that's just had a heart attack, you train them on the bike, they're going to get better on the bike, they're going to get better at running, and all of those things are going to happen. Once you guys reach some sort of reasonable level of fitness, which is probably about where most of you guys are if you're reasonably active, then this idea of have a cross-training day. I'm a runner, go ride the bike this day. Riding the bike is of no help to you to become a better runner, or vice versa. Going to run when you want to be a cyclist, it's of no use to you from improving your VO2 max. My dad still doesn't believe me. He still doesn't believe me. Was averse to ever taking days off. He's like, well, I'm not going to run, I'm going to go ride my bike. And I'm like, why? He's like, oh, but my bike, I'm getting my heart rate up, it's good, right? That's got to have some other things for my fitness. I'm like, no, you're just getting better at riding your bike. You never race on your bike. Yours is on his bike now, but I'm like, you never race on your bike, so what are you doing? You're a marathon runner, go run. Or, God forbid, take a day off, okay? So the specificity, if you train in a certain way, your VO2 max is going to go up during that modality, okay? if you're really unfit, so I mean, you got a VO2 max like under 30 or somewhere, then any kind of training in any modality is probably going to make all the other ones go up. But once you get up kind of into the kind of high 30s or low 40s, then it becomes very specific. Okay? And part of this is because you're going to get some central circulatory adaptations. So like your heart's going to get bigger, your stroke volume's going to go up. But a lot of the other things, the specific adaptations are going to occur only in the muscle groups that you're using. So you're going to gain mitochondria, you're going to gain capillaries and things only in the muscles that you use during exercise. And so you use similar muscles, but not all the same ones if you run versus if you bike versus if you row and those things. Okay? So that's kind of what's happening. All right. Questions about that?
Basically, you're saying that doing difference in whatever activity it is, that's what like it's separated in what you're doing.
Correct. Correct.
You're saying it's because like you're not going to use the same muscle.
I still, if I hadn't seen the data, and I'm happy to show people data. I've seen the data. It seems implausible that that's the case, but that's the case. And if I've ever put somebody on the treadmill and have them run a VO2 max test, and then I put a very fit person on a bike, they tend to stop on the bike before you would ever think so, because they're not used to sort of contracting their quads and glutes and things. You get this kind of local muscular fatigue on the bike that you don't typically get if you have a person that runs a bunch. And you have a person that cycles a whole bunch and you put them on the treadmill and they're not used to running. And so they get weird things happening in their plantar and dorsiflexors and things, and they kind of crap out before they can reach sort of their potential based upon their circulatory capacity and their mitochondria and those things. Okay. All right. I think that is it for this one. All right. Okay. So let me pull up the other one.
Are all the ones that are posted on modules
All the ones that I have posted up till now will for sure be on test number 2. We may get to another one. So like all the stuff through diabetes will for sure be on test number 2. Whether or not we do research methods, and then maybe I think cancer is next. We'll just kind of have to play that by ear. Okay. I'll have to see what kind of progress we make. Okay. When I say body composition, what jumps into your head? Camilla, what do you think of if I say body comp? Just the first thing that pops in your head. Okay, the amount of fat that somebody has. Okay, it's pretty typical. Mitchell, what about you? Anything different?
I was just going to say like what you want.
What my body is made of. Okay, see what you are made of. What are you made of? No, don't look, okay? Yes, that is correct. That is what you are made up of, okay? It is what you're made up of, okay? How many of you in class, when I said body composition, the first thing you think of is, oh God, how much fat do I have? Is that anybody? A few of you guys? Okay. Very, very typical, okay? Most people, their conception of body composition is really surrounding, okay? What is my percent body fat, okay? That's not the entire story. We're going to talk about percent body fat, but we're also going to talk about other things that are going to be encompassed in body composition that may also be really, really important, okay? Because when we do the body composition lab, the first thing everybody thinks of is, oh boy, what are my numbers going to be? What's this going to look like, right? What is my percent body fat going to be? What we're really going to try to get at, though, is what are these other things, as Mitchell so eloquently put them, right? What are you made up of? That's what body comp is really going to tell us. Okay, it's a quantification. It's going to put some numbers to what are sort of the chemical and anatomical makeup of your body. Okay? How much water does Maddie have in her body in comparison to Samantha? Okay, maybe it's a competition, maybe it's not. Okay, how much calcium and minerals in their bones does Hallie have in comparison to Lily? Okay? Or to everybody else. So what this is going to let us do is not just learn body fat, but also try to understand fat is lipid. There's other things you're made up of. You've got protein, you have water, there are certain minerals, okay? And the amounts of those things are going to be very, very important. They're going to have real meaning from a health outcome standpoint. And so we need to try to understand those. So body comp is significant for a couple of really, really important reasons. The first of those is not one that people tend to think about, okay? But your body composition is, at its most basic, an indicator of your nutritional status, okay? Are you getting a sufficient amount of each of the things that you're made up of? Are you getting an insufficient amount? Are you getting a sort of over amount of those kinds of things? Okay? So body comp is very much related in some ways, some parts of it, to energy balance. If you eat more food than you need every day, there is a chance that your body composition will change as you gain weight. Right? If you eat less food than you need every day from an energy balance standpoint, your body composition as well as your weight will change, and there's some kinds of derivations of all of them. So it's an indicator of nutritional status. And that becomes really, really important, especially in people that are eating too much and people that are eating not enough, and that is also going to have some interplay as we age. It's also related to overall health status and well-being. Okay? Although you guys will see, we don't actually have a huge amount of data on body comp and true measures of this much muscle, this much fat, this much bone mineral density, et cetera, and the health outcomes. What we have a huge amount of data on is BMI, which is not a measure of body composition, but it's going to somewhat correlate to body composition. So, but we do know that having excess amounts of body fat can potentially be related to poor health status. We know that having a lack of muscle mass and lean tissue can be related to poor health status. And we know that having lower amounts of minerals in our bones is also going to be related to a poor health status. So we'll kind of go through some of that stuff. Okay? All right, so we start this. We're going to go through different ways to measure and quantify actual composition. We're going to start with something that's a very popular measure that is not, in fact, body composition. You can imagine a scenario where I write a tricky multiple choice question that says, right, like, all of the following things about measures of body composition are true, except, and then I say something dumb about BMI. It's not a measure of body composition. Okay? So, we know as BMI increases, especially as it goes over 25 and as it goes over 30, that poor health outcomes become more common. Okay? So the body mass index is your weight divided by your height squared. It's your weight in kilograms and your height in meters squared. There are these very well laid out tables, right? About 18.5 to 25 or 24.9 is normal. 25 to 29.9 is overweight, and then 30 and above is considered obese. Lots of data on all of this, okay? But this is going to encompass both height and actual potential body composition. And it makes no accounting for that different tissues have different densities and therefore have a different amount of weight per kind of volume that they take up. Okay? Fat has less density than muscle. Okay? Muscle has less density than bone. And so, depending upon if you are a person that has high bone mineral density, lots of muscle, not a lot of fat, okay, you may have an artificially elevated BMI. So by BMI, you may think I am overweight or obese, okay? People that tend to be very muscular are going to look, because they weigh more, because muscle weighs more, they're going to have higher BMIs, okay? And this doesn't make any accounting for that, all right? Doesn't make any accounting for that. In older individuals, especially older women, they may have a normal BMI, but they may have low bone mineral content and somewhat elevated fat content that sort of offset each other, and therefore it looks like their BMI is normal, but they may actually have some kinds of problems. Okay, so BMI makes no distinction between what we would call overweight. When we use the word overfat, it should probably be overlipided or something like that. We know that adipose tissue excess adipose tissue has negative health consequences. Okay? So we will do this as part of your lab. All of you will calculate your BMI, and all of you will calculate your percent body fat based upon one of our easy measures to make, and we will try to correlate those things. And I promise you, they're not going to correlate that well. Okay? They're not going to correlate that well because they're accounting for very different things. It's hard. Men and women and old and young people, the relationships are going to be a little bit different in those things. And they're really, really off in people that are way too. So just keep that in mind. Okay? Zach.
So why is it easy?
Because it's easy. I can call you on the phone and you can tell me your height and you can tell me your weight. Or you can show up at the school or the doctor's office or someplace, and I can put you on a scale. The scale is relatively inexpensive, and I can measure your height and I can measure your weight, and then we can do some other things. As you guys will see, to really and truly accurately measure body composition, okay, either requires high levels of practice and training, which a lot of people don't have, or very expensive, very sophisticated pieces of equipment. And so that makes it, in many instances, infeasible to do this. And to try to understand the relationship between obesity and body composition and these things and various health outcomes, we need data from thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Does that make sense? It's a good question. It's a terrible measure of anything except for all the other measures, right? It's not good, but it's better than nothing, and it does kind of work. Okay? In a very general, average kind of person, it works fine, but it doesn't do very good on either. Okay? So here is our sort of weirdly anthropometrically inaccurate dude who's going to be here. Here is what we're going to assess as somebody that has a relatively normal body composition or normal BMI. Under 25 kilogram per meter squared. He looks kind of like this. As he gets into this sort of area, you can note that he begins to look a little softer, right? We have a little excess. This is overweight. This is an actual not having more muscle. This is having excess adipose tissue here. This is a little bit elevated risk with basically all of our chronic health conditions. And then here is obese in some ways. You will note that in our guy here that we tend to be adding adiposity here in the central regions. Okay, this is visceral adiposity here in what we might think of as kind of a prototypical beer belly. Okay, the distribution of where you add excess adipose tissue matters. It matters greatly. Okay, and it's going to vary from individual to individual. Certain people will carry excess adipose tissue in different places. It especially tends to vary between men and women. Okay? Having excess adipose tissue here in your sort of lower abdominal region is the most dangerous place to have. That is the location that is associated with the most number of poor health consequences, okay? And so in this way, men tend to more preferably deposit adipose tissue in that region in comparison to women, okay? Men tend to be very central, right? Here, face, neck, upper sort of chest, especially here over their sort of belly region. A lot of women tend to be much more hip, legs, okay, arms. Why is that? A lot of different genetic kind of hormone-driven reasons and things, but this having excess fat around the liver and the portal veins and around your pancreas and those kinds of things really, really leads to elevated risk of high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes. Okay? So we could spend an entire class talking about kind of why visceral adiposity is so bad. I just want you guys to know that. Okay? So that's kind of what that means. Here we have, okay, an example of, we have two people that are identical in height and in weight. We have our bodybuilder who's 5'11" and weighs 220 pounds. He only has 5% body fat. He is very, very, very muscular. Okay? Very muscular. You can all sort of imagine what he might look like, sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger here, or something like that. And then we have a similar fellow who's 5'11", also weighs 220 pounds, but his BMI is 30.7. So their BMI is the same, but yet just by looking at sort of their general outlines, you can imagine that this guy has less muscle and his excess weight is coming from excess adipose tissue. This guy's excess weight, in theory, is coming much more so from protein, from muscle. Okay? And so this is one of the ways that we can try to highlight that body mass index does not make a distinction between these two guys. And the argument is that this guy probably has much greater risk of poor health outcomes than this guy, although we don't know how this guy got to this physique. He was taking steroids or doing something, and there may be some bad consequences there. Okay? Does that make sense? You guys understand kind of the hows and the whys? Why BMI, it does give us useful information, but in scenarios like this, it can't, like you just see this, right, in a data file, and you don't have any additional information. You just think, okay, well, this guy's obese, and so he's probably at a greater risk of something. When in fact, he is kind of the outlier. The vast majority of people that have a BMI over 30, right, are going to have more body composition that looks more like this rather than that. Okay. You see that they pop down. If you've got a question in the chat. Yes. No. Okay. All right. Doesn't want to advance. Okay. So to switch and get into actual composition, what it is that you're made up of, there are lots of different ideas on how we should do this. Lots of different philosophies on how we partition out the individual components that you are made up of. None of them are particularly right or wrong. Some give us more information about some things than others. And so how we do it is really going to be dependent upon what information we want to learn. Okay? So if we look at something and they're calling this a healthy body composition, I don't know what the hell that means. Okay? But what you're going to see is this is what would probably be we would consider to be a relatively lean, or a person that does not have a lot of excess or really almost any excess adipose tissue for college-aged men and women. So if we look at all of that, a typical college-age male that is pretty lean is going to be about 45% muscle, okay? Has about 15% total body fat, 3% of which ish is essential, 12% is what we call non-essential. They're about 15% of their body composition is the minerals in their bone, and then the 25% is basically your organ counts. If we look at women, by contrast, okay, women tend to have less muscle, so about 36%. Their essential fat is 12% versus 3%. Non-essential fat is a little bit higher, so 15% body fat in a typical college-age male who is relatively lean, about 27% in a relatively lean college-aged female. Women have a little bit less bone, partially because they're smaller, but also they tend to have less bone mineral density, and then their other organs are everything else. Okay? What this is going to illustrate, though, is depending upon how you body composition changes, the percentage of things that go into each one of these categories is going to shift around. Most people that are obese by BMI, they're going to have a lot of their excess weight here in the green, in what we call non-essential fat. So they may have less muscle, although people that tend to be obese do also have a lot of muscle. It takes a lot of strength to carry the excess weight around, but they're going to have a lower percentage of muscle and a higher percentage of non-essential fat. Okay? So essential fat is going to represent the amount of adipose tissue that your body must have so that you don't die. Okay? Admittedly, these numbers and these percentages are guesses, right? I assume none of you are going to let me starve you to the point that you die, and we can figure out kind of what your how much fat you had right at that particular place. So these are guesses, these are estimates, but about 3% in men and about 12% in women. And so this difference in essential fat, for the most part, is the difference and that's going to separate essential amount of fat.
If Haley gets top 3, we're taking shots.
So someone on Zoom is not on mute.
I feel like we should like make.
Oh wait, he.
Say, Jordan, we can hear you. Thanks. So that's what's happening here. Okay. And this increase in essential fat in women is all due to childbirth. Okay? If you look at this in prepubescent men and women, or girls and boys, they look the same. Okay. And in prepubescent folks, muscle tissue is lower because you've not reached puberty. Muscle mass in both sexes tends to go up post-puberty. But before puberty, little boys and little girls look exactly the same. Okay? They look exactly the same. You can't tell them apart. All right? My daughter looks just like all the little boys, only she's bigger than them in her class, like at daycare and those kinds of things. Post-puberty, that's when this is gonna go up and increase. Okay. I should warn everyone, there's some dissection pictures coming. So if that causes you problems, please feel free to look away. Okay? So the best way to measure this, how do we know what you're made up of? This will be a question on the test. You need to know this answer. The most accurate way of assessing body composition is through an anatomical dissection. Okay? That's it, anatomical dissection. We wait until poor Katie dies, and then we dissect her. Okay? That's it, that's how we know that. Many of you, if you've had human phys here, you did a dissection on the cadaver. So this is not an unexpected thing, but we wait until the person dies, we dissect them, we lay out all of their tissue, and things like that. Okay? Now, this is the most accurate way to do this. It takes, even in an actual cadaver, it takes a ridiculous amount of manpower and man hours to do this, or woman hours to do this. And it's completely worthless to us in any kind of living person. Okay? But What has happened is all the things I'm going to show you guys from here on out are what we call indirect measures. They're estimates based upon some other things that we can measure. But just know that all of our indirect measures have, for the most part, been validated against an anatomical dissection. There's a collection of cadavers that I believe are held in the National Library of Medicine now, but they are what we call reference cadavers. And they're of sort of representative age. They go across the age range. They are men, they are women, there's some kids and things. But people have done the dissections on them and then done x-rays or DEXAs or MRIs or underwater weighing and things against them to check and make sure that their numbers are going to work. Okay? They've been validated in that particular way. So in our little mouse here, we have a relatively lean mouse. Here we have an obese mouse. You can see his little fatty pooch that was right there kind of over his liver. Okay, he may have had fatty liver disease. And then here we have a relatively lean man and a significantly sort of obese man. You'll note the difference in subcutaneous fat that's going to be here, but also fat in and around their internal organs that we're going to see. Okay? Fat out here on the back, around the spinal cord, and those kinds of things. So it's this excess fat here, and especially this excess fat around some of these internal organs, they're going to look like what our mouse looks like there. That are going to be the things that probably lead us to our poor health outcomes. Okay. To assess body composition, okay, to assess body composition, the primary place that we start is by understanding body density, or just density in general. Okay? The density of an object is how much it weighs per how much space it occupies. Okay? How much does it weigh? So mass divided by volume. Mass divided by volume. If I wanted to know your mass, how might I measure your mass? A scale. You can hop on the scale. You don't have to, but we can hop on a scale, we can get your mass. Taylor, if I want to know your volume, how can I figure out what your volume is? You don't know, okay? Anybody take a bath? Like you guys take baths rather than showers? I end up in the bathtub a lot because my daughter gets dirty a lot, and I'm sort of the designated bath giver in those wells. So we had a bath last night, okay? You get in the bathtub, you run some water in the bathtub, and we did this last night, serendipitously. You fill up the tub, and you get in, and what happens to the water? Water level rises, okay? By how much does the water level rise? By your volume, okay? By your volume. Because you are moving that much water out of the way as you get into the tub. And so one of the ways that we can learn what your volume is we can dunk you in water and see how much it raises the level of water. When I was a postdoc, we measured swelling in people's biceps by having them stick their arm in a tank of water to see how much the water level would rise. We would put it in there and it would displace this water out, and we would collect it in the jug, and we would go weigh the jug. For my dissertation, we looked at swelling using an MRI machine. I went from an MRI to collecting freaking water in that way. And so we always chuckled that was pretty ironic in many ways. Okay? So if we know your mass by weighing you and we know your volume by learning sort of dunking you in water or something like that, we can calculate your density. And if we know what your overall body density is, if we know the density of fat and the density of bone and the density of muscle tissue, as well as water, we can fit your density into an equation, and it will roughly tell us, okay, well, if your overall body density is X, then you are probably, if those three things have these known densities, you're probably some percentage of all three of those things to arrive at your overall body density. Okay? So the idea, right, of Archimedes' principle is an object repels water and then will either float or sink in direct relation to its density. We're not going to get into all of sort of the physics of all of this, but that's the idea behind Archimedes' principle. Because fat and muscle, especially in bone, have very different densities, muscle occupies less space than fat. Muscle is more dense than fat is going to be. Muscle has a density relative to water of about 1.1. So water is our reference density. Water has a density of 1 gram per cubic centimeter, which is basically 1 gram per milliliter of water. Okay. Muscle is about 1.1. Muscle is mostly water, but the protein, so it's more dense than water. So muscle sinks in water. Fat has a density of about 0.9 grams per cubic centimeter. So fat is less dense than water. Okay. So when you put fat into water, fat wants to float. And so the higher your percentage body fat relative to your muscle and your bone, then the more buoyant you're going to be in water, which is one of the ways that you can try to learn what your body composition is. Okay? So I can remember being a prepubescent child, always wanting to be able to float at swim lessons in the way that my mom could. Mom could float better than me. It drove me crazy because you had to like float for like 15 minutes to pass something wherever I went to. I don't even know why we did this. I went to swim lessons, and I always had to like fight to like stay afloat. Like you try to lay there, right? And those kinds of things. And now I'm wondering why my mom was at swim lessons with me. It raises more questions, but she could float much easier than I could. And that was because, in general, women tend to float a little better than men because they have a little bit higher percent body fat. People that are obese float better than people that are normal weight because they have more fat. And fat is less dense than water. So that's one of our principles. We need to understand densitometry. Almost everything that we're going to do in doing indirect quantification of body composition comes back to this idea of density. Okay? So we're gonna take a break for a minute, and I'll talk about these models and compartment models of body composition, and then we'll go into some individual measures, and I'll try to tell you sort of how they're going to try to compartmentalize things and how that comes back to densitometry. Okay. All right. Let's take. I don't know what time is it. It's 11:58. Let's take until 12:05 for our break. Okay, so one other kind of piece of information to kind of keep in mind as we talk about body composition is how we're going to choose to compartmentalize what it is that you're made up of, okay? And so I'm going to start off with what most of our measures do that we would talk about or use in our labs would be a 2-compartment model. And then 3 and 4 compartment models are going to be more sophisticated and generally a little bit more accurate, but they can also end up being more difficult to do. Okay? So a 2-compartment model of body composition essentially splits what you're made up of into fat or lipid tissue and then basically everything else. Okay? You are adipose tissue and non-adipose tissue. In that non-adipose tissue is going to be water and muscle and bone and organs and all of those things. Basically everything that is not lipids or adipose. Okay? And so we oftentimes will call a 2-compartment model that you are going to be fat mass and what we call fat-free mass, or FFM. Okay? Fat, everything else. As we increase the number of compartments, what we're going to end up doing is the fat mass portion or the lipid portion is going to stay the same, but we're going to find a way to partition out the fat-free mass into little more specific buckets or categories. Okay, so what you can do is take fat-free mass, and in a 3-compartment model, we're going to split the fat-free mass into what we call lean body mass or lean tissue, and then minerals from your bones. So you are still fat mass, then you have basically muscle mass, water, and some things that are going to make up parts of your organs, and then mineral from bones. Okay, that's a 3-compartment model. We will talk about one 3-compartment or 3-component way of assessing things, and then at some point, probably today, one of my graduate students will send you guys an email and say, hey, do you want to come be in my dissertation study? And as part of all of that, you can get a 3-compartment model assessment of your body composition. Okay? A 4-compartment model is going to basically leave the mineral portion, and it's going to take this lean body mass and try to split that into protein, and then residual lean mass, which is basically water or something like all of that and stuff from some organs. So it kind of splits it in this particular way. So 2-compartment models are the most basic. They're the easiest ones for us to measure. Because of that, though, because they're considering just fat and then everything else, they're also the most inaccurate. Okay? 3- and 4-compartment models are more accurate, but they're more complicated. They typically are more expensive to be able to do. Okay? Traditionally, there is a way of assessing a 4-compartment, or what we call a 4-component model. And that has traditionally been the gold standard way of determining body composition. Okay? We have moved away from that. And I'm going to talk to you guys about what's a DEXA scan. DEXA is a fancy x-ray, but it's a 3-compartment model that will get us fat, fat-free tissue, and bone. And that DEXA has, in essence, become the gold standard. Part of the problem with the 4-component model is the way we were assessing total body water. You would drink something called deuterium. Have you ever heard of deuterium? Deuterium is radioactive water. It's not dangerous radioactive water. It's heavy water. But one of the ways that they would find all of this, there's a particular oil and natural gas company that they would find this when they were drilling and things, and then they bought up all the rest of it. So the prices of deuterium has gone way, way up, and so now it's like $1,500 a person to do deuterium dilution. It used to be like $100. So you would drink this heavy water, then we would collect your urine over the course of, say, a 10-day period. You would see how much of the deuterium would appear, or how quickly it would appear in your urine. And from all of that, we could calculate your total body water through some fancy calculations. We don't do that very much anymore. Okay? DEXA is going to be pretty good. Okay. So we're now going to walk through different ways to assess body comp. These are all going to be indirect measures. Okay? And I'll try to point out to you what the compartments are going to be when we do all this. Okay? Of the indirect measures, they are, for the most part, all going to be densitometry based. So it's about density of tissues and the volume that that tissue occupies. The first one, okay, that we're going to talk about is something called magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. Anybody had an MRI? Okay, so like half of you guys have had an MRI. Okay, I've had multiple when I was in high school and college on my shoulder. You guys want to have a fun day? I'll tell you about the time that the radiologist used me as a guinea pig to try to inject dye into my shoulder capsule to better visualize my rotator cuff. And he spent an hour and a half trying to get the needle past the head of my humerus. And he kept hitting the head of my humerus with the stupid injection needle over and over and over again. He clearly never had anatomy, because then all I had to do was supinate, and it turned the head of the humerus, and it opened the joint capsule up, and he could slide it right in. But by that point, the local anesthetic had begun to wear off, and I could feel it, and I wanted to kill somebody. But, and at the end of all of it, of course, I did not have a torn rotator cuff, so it was all for naught. But an MRI is a very sophisticated imaging technique. I did a lot of MRIs as part of my dissertation, and so unfortunately I know a lot of the physics of how an MRI machine works. But basically, we put you in a magnetic field, you get in the magnet gets turned on, and all of the water, all of the charged particles, mostly water, in your body line their protons and electrons up in a certain direction. They're all in the same direction. They then turn the magnet off, and they all go back to their original sort of conformation. And the rate at which they sort of go back is going to be different based upon how much water is in a given tissue. And we can use that to help us build these images and these contrast images of bone and muscle and organs and etc. Okay? So MRI is, of all of our indirect measures of body composition, MRI is unquestionably the most accurate one. Okay? Unquestionably the most accurate. It's also the one that we can basically never use. Okay? It's outrageously expensive. You guys have a spare $5 million laying around, buy an MRI machine. I'm not joking. Okay? Buy an MRI machine. You go to a diagnostic place here in Norman, or you go to the hospital, you want to get in the magnet. Hopefully, if you have insurance, it's about $2,000 an hour to use the MRI machine. Okay? And those things are used 12 or 14 hours every day of the week. Okay? I'm telling you, if you've got like $5 million, you can buy the magnet and set up the room, just printing money going forward. Okay? So, the problem is that if you will look at our person here, what you will note is an MRI takes a cross section. It takes an image, but it does it in a cross section. Okay? And so in order to have a very, very accurate assessment of your body composition, we need these slices through you. We need these cross sections to essentially run from the top of your head right next to each other all the way down to your feet. Okay? To get an image that does this, or to get all of these images, you'd probably have to sit in the magnet for maybe 4 or 5 hours to get a head-to-toe scan with this number of images, so that we can accurately go in then and see what it looks like. Normally, when you go and you get in the magnet, they're going to image like right around whatever organ or joint they want to look at. If you're in there for 45 minutes, we did for my dissertation, we did a region in the quadriceps from sort of about right here down to the head of the patella, and that was about a 45-minute scan. And you have to sit there and not move for 45 minutes in that tiny tube with that loud-ass noise, clicking and clacking and all of those kinds of things. And so imagine you got to put your arm up over your head, and it's got to go from the tip of your finger down all the way to the tip of your toes to look like this. Okay? So one, the scan takes forever. You're paying sort of hospital rates. If it takes 5 hours, you're probably out 10 grand, okay, to have that done. Then some poor grad student has to go into every image. Let me see if I have it in the next one. I don't have one. Some poor grad student has to go into every image. This is a quadricep. This is one slice, kind of right in the middle of the quad. Poor grad student has to go in and circle every muscle, bone, subcutaneous fat, blood vessel down here is your femoral artery, all of these little individual things. Every structure in every image, right, from here all the way down. So you may have 180 images or something. They're usually about a centimeter thick. So you're kind of a regular person. Okay? So it's expensive. It takes forever to image. and it's going to take somebody forever to analyze all of it. But the good part is that once you've done all of that, because we know we can tell with very, very high levels of accuracy muscle from fat and from different organs and those things, and we know the various densities, we can get a very, very accurate assessment of what your body composition is. We can find the bone, we can learn what the bone's going to be. We can't really get water. It's really a 3-component model where it's going to be fat and then lean tissue and then bone, but it's very, very accurate and completely infeasible to do. Okay? But that's going to be the best one. What is now, for the most part, considered the gold standard of assessments, because the technology is relatively less expensive and pretty readily accessible, is something called a DEXA. DEXA stands for Dual Energy X-ray Absorbiometry. Okay? Dual Energy X-ray Absorbiometry. A DEXA is a fancy X-ray. That's the easiest way to describe it. Okay? It's a fancy X-ray. And so the DEXA machines cost $90,000 or thereabouts. We have 2 in our department over in the other building. They cost about $90 million. That's not $5 million. Okay? Much more feasible. To get a whole body DEXA scan takes about 4 minutes. Okay? You just got to lay there for 4, not for 5 hours. And so here you have roughly the information that the DEXA is going to give us. Okay? Because it's an X-ray, it's going to give us a very, very accurate picture of bone. Okay? And then if you're going to get this kind of ghosted image laid on top of the bone, where you can see, kind of based upon signal intensities, you can see fat and you can see muscle from this sort of kind of ghosted image. And so what DEXA gives us is muscle, what it calls lean tissue, which is let me back up, sorry. DEXA gives us fat or adipose tissue. It gives us lean tissue, which is muscle and water and internal organs. And then it gives us bone. And so because it does 3 things and it separates the bone from the muscle and the water, then it gives us a much more accurate estimate of body composition. Okay? A much more accurate estimate.
Very much more accurate compared to the MRI?
No, compared to the other techniques that I'm going to show you guys today. It's a good question. Right? Skin fold, pinching your skin folds. If you guys have done that or seen that, we're going to do a thing where we hold, it's called bioelectrical impedance. You hold this little instrument and it runs a very weak electrical current through your arms and it gives you a number. If you go over to the Huff, they have a thing outside the little desk. You can stand on it. It's bioelectrical impedance and it tells you your body composition from that. That looks sophisticated. It's actually not very. It's wildly inaccurate. But this is much, much better. Okay? So the really good thing about this is you get body comps, you get muscle and fat, but we also are going to get bone mineral density. And especially for you ladies, if you know what your bone mineral density is now, then you can begin to get some ideas on, are you normal, are you high, are you already a little bit low, and all of that, so that when you reach menopause, you stop making estrogen, and your bone mineral density begins to plummet because of the lack of estrogen, then you can tell in some ways kind of where your normal range, beginning range was for the development of osteoporosis. Okay? All right. So other ways that we do this, other indirect measures that are based upon densitometry. One is the skin fold thickness. So we can see our gentleman here pinching his belly. Okay. We have skin fold calipers. We've got a whole bunch of them back there. In a normal semester, you guys would do this to each other. Okay. But everybody who's at home on Zoom, I want you to do this. Everybody in the classroom, do this for me. We'll try to explain how this works. Okay. Take your left arm. If you're a right-handed person, take your left arm. If you're a left-handed person, take your right arm. Put it out in front of you, okay? Straight out in front. You guys can see me like this, okay? Out in front, relax your arm. Then I want you to take 2 fingers, take your thumb and one of your fingers, like your thumb and your middle finger on your other hand, And I want you to pinch in the middle of your tricep muscle, pinch, and then pull down while you're pinching, and you should feel the muscle sort of roll up, and what you're left with is adipose tissue. What you're left with is mine is waving at you is my flabby tricep, okay? What you've got is, that is skin plus subcutaneous adipose tissue. That's how we take a skin fold, okay? And we'll go through in a few slides, or probably on Wednesday, we'll go through, there are 7 very specific sites that we take skin folds, okay? But you make a measurement of those things at multiple sites, and then you plug those measures into some equations, and it lets you estimate a percent body fat, right? The idea behind skin folds are that subcutaneous body fat is the largest reservoir of adipose tissue in your entire body, okay? And so if we can get these rough estimates of how much subcutaneous fat you have by measuring these skin folds, we can get a reasonable approximation of your total body fat, okay? And so those sites are going to cover upper and lower body. They're going to be, the 7 sites are going to be the same for men and women, but if you do fewer than that, they're going to be a little different between men and women. And so we can use these estimates, right? If you have more subcutaneous adipose tissue, you probably have more total body fat. That's the general idea, okay? A skilled person who knows what they're doing, which is very likely none of you all in class, okay? A skilled person can probably get skin fold values that are within maybe 2 or 3% of what we would get from a DEXA, okay? They can be very accurate, but it takes a lot of practice to get good at measuring and finding the sites, and then how to cope with sort of making the measurements, okay? Doing skin fold thickness is reasonably easy in sort of college age folks. It's pretty easy in people that are kind of sort of mildly overweight or mildly obese to pretty lean. It's not that difficult. It's pretty easy to do. When you get into people that are very, very obese and that are older, it can become much, much more difficult. Okay? The other way we measure body comp is through what we call bioelectrical impedance. Anybody had physics 2? Okay, do you remember impedance? Remember what impedance is? Oh, you're in it right now. Okay. So impedance has to do with electricity, right? It's the inverse of resistance. I don't remember. That part of electricity and magnets in physics 2, which I assume they cover in physics 2 everywhere, but that stuff makes my brain hurt because it's all backwards of what you would think that it should be. Okay? But what basically happens is you stand on these little metal plates, or you hold something in your arms that has little metal plates on it, and it runs an electrical current into your body. You cannot feel it. It is imperceptible. It's not going to shock you. But muscle is mostly water. Water is a very, very good transmitter of electricity. Okay? Adipose tissue, lipids, are very poor transmitters of electricity. They're an insulator. And so the more body fat that you have, the slower the electrical current is going to move up like one arm and then over and then down the other arm, or up one leg and then down the other leg. Okay? The more muscle, the more water you have, the faster it goes. And so based upon your height and an estimate of arm or leg length for your height, which is not really great for me because I have short arms and short legs. It's not great in my wife because she has long arms and long legs and no midsection, which is part of why this is an inaccurate measure. But based upon some of those things and your age and your relative weight, it spits out what it thinks is a percent body fat. Bioelectrical impedance does pretty good in people that are average. If you're in the middle, it's not too bad. Probably within 4 or 5% accurate of a DEXA. If you are very obese, okay, which we don't see a lot in college age folks, or you are very lean, which we do see a lot of in college age folks, if you're on either extreme, it doesn't do very good, okay? So next week, as part of the body comp lab, you guys will make a measure with bioelectrical impedance at your percent body fat. You guys will do this way, okay? And we'll take all of our numbers with the caveat. That's one of the ways that we can do all this. Okay? Probably more accurate than either of those things, but not as accurate as DEXA, not as accurate as MRI, is an old school way of using densitometry that we don't do very much anymore. And it's called underwater weighing. If you take exercise physiology lab class with Dr. Pereira, you will get the opportunity, if you choose, to do underwater weighing. You can go to Dr. Larson's lab and they'll fill up the tank, which is basically, if anybody has seen Silence of the Lambs, it's the hole where they put the girl in Silence of the Lambs. It gets down, like the floor is like this, and it's like 15 feet down into the floor, and they fill it up, this is like a bathtub, and they fill it up with water. Some places it's above ground, it's this big, like clear plexiglass tank that you can see out of, which for me at least is way sort of mentally better. I can keep my eyes open and see. But what you do is you get in the tank of water, there's a swing, you sit on the swing, and it lowers you down in, and you dunk your head under, you blow all the air out of your lungs, which is also kind of freaky when you're about to go underwater, is to blow all the air out of your lungs. But you do this, and we see how much do you weigh underwater, okay? And if we know how much you weigh, we can then do some calculations. People that have higher amounts of muscle, higher bone mineral density, less adipose tissue, they sink to a greater extent, and therefore they weigh more underwater relative to their dry land weight than people that have more adipose tissue. So here we have our thing from earlier. We have our two guys. We have Jack and we have Dave, or what I like to say is we have college-age Dr. Black and we have Dr. Black today, as we look at these kinds of things. So as you can see, they both weigh 205 pounds, right? They're the same height, but underwater, Jack weighs 6.5 kilograms, Dave weighs 5 kilograms, okay? And so then we can do some calculations. Dave is less dense than Jack. He occupies more space, right? But he is less dense. And so relative body fat, in this particular example, Jack is 10.5, Dave is about 18.5. Okay? So if you weigh more underwater, you probably have more muscle, more bone mineral density, less fat. This is sort of the true use of Archimedes' principle in some ways to do all of this. This is relatively accurate. If you've got a tank and you can do it, probably within 2 or 3% of a DEXA scan, but you have to have the tank, you got to fill it up with water, people have to blow all the air out of their lungs, they got to be willing to let you dunk them underwater, and so it's become less and less popular as a thing to do. In the 80s and in the early 90s, this was kind of the way that exercise physiology departments assessed body composition. So there we go. Another way takes place, we're going to do densitometry, but it is something called air displacement plethysmography, which I promise you I won't make you spell. Okay? But this is, we're going to put you in this device here, which we have over in the other building. It's called the bod pod. Okay? And yes, it looks like a spaceship or something. But what happens in the bod pod is rather than using water, we use air. Okay? And so there is a law that's called Boyle's law, which tells us that pressure, the ratio of pressure on two sides of an object, is inversely proportional or inversely equal to the volume occupied on either side of that particular object. And so we sit you in the chamber so we know the volume on either side. That part doesn't change. We blow air at a certain pressure that we know, across your body from one side, and then we measure the pressure on the other side, and that can then, we know what that pressure is, then we can kind of calculate out what your body volume is. Okay? And so you sit in here, and it shoots air on you, and that's kind of it. Okay? To get a really, really accurate estimate using this, you have to shave your head, shave off all the hair on your body, and then go in basically in like a bikini or just like bikini briefs, and that's it. Okay? Anything that is clothing that is not tight fitting, any excess hair creates turbulence in the air that comes across, and that changes our measures of pressure. Okay? So to be really, really honest, when we typically do this to people, you put on a shower cap and you wear like a pair of like bike shorts and then like a tight fitting. Guys, especially if you have some like chest hair and things, you wear like a tight fitting workout shirt or something. Ladies, very similar, like wear a sports bra and like a pair of like bike shorts or something like that. Pull your hair up and into a shower cap. We can get a pretty accurate measure. Okay, so again, I don't remember what these machines cost, 10 grand or something like that. Ours is super old. Well, do you guys have one of those over in athletics? You know, have you guys? I know you also have a DEXA machine, but they have to write a prescription to use the DEXA machine, so y'all don't get to use it very much. But there may be a way to use this to get body comp and those kinds of things. If they want to keep track of you guys. If you guys ever want to use this for your capstone project, it's available. It's not hard. You put the person in, you punch a button, and it goes. In those kinds of things. Okay. Again, though, it's just as easy for us. We put you on the DEXA, and then we get it number. Okay. Although, to be honest, from class, I can't give you guys a DEXA as part of class. When I was a grad student at the University of Georgia, we had a DEXA machine. When we did our lab like this, everybody got a DEXA score. But because it has radiation associated with it, the radiation people here at OU are they're much stricter than they were at Georgia. We'll just say that. And so, ladies, for you guys to get a DEXA, when we do it as a part of a research study, you'll have to take a pregnancy test as well and confirm that you're not pregnant, so that we can you will get just as much radiation walking from this classroom over to our building as you get from the DEXA machine. But it's theoretically unnecessary radiation. So that's kind of how we'll do this. Zach, you got a question? No, God, you fly on a cross-country flight, like fly from Boston to Seattle, and it's like having 20 DEXA scans because you're up in the atmosphere, right? You're closer to the sun, less stuff is not kind of dissipated as much. No, it's basically like no radiation exposure.
For MRI, but you have to work in how long radiation.
No radiation with MRI, none whatsoever. And the DEXA is less focused, so you get less radiation from a DEXA than you do from like a regular X-ray, or what you would get from like a whole body sort of X-ray. So like you do the DEXA scan, you guys have probably, if you've ever been to get an X-ray, like they typically they'll give you like a lead vest to wear, or like guys, we have to usually put it over our crotch region. Ladies, y'all sometimes have to go kind of here when we want to try to cover your ovaries and testes getting covered. We don't want there to be radiation damage to sperm or to eggs or things. X-ray is much more focused. The DEXA is much more diffuse. Literally walking outside, you get as much X-ray exposure as you do radiation exposure. But it's excess. You want to be very, very careful. Okay? And now I'm on tape saying all of that. So. Okay. We talked about DEXA. See, here's the DEXA table. You just lay down, this little bar slides up and down on all of you. DEXA is pretty cool too because it can tell you like the body composition like in one arm or the other arm, or one leg and the other leg, or how much of it is sort of central adiposity. It gives us bone mineral density in pick a bone. Typically they do the bone mineral density in these regions. They want to look at the head of the femur, sort of right over the femur and the acetabulum where it fits in your hip. In this person, you can see the darker the bones look, the more calcium there is in those bones. And so just look at how look at how sort of dense the skull is, okay, in comparison to some other ones, which is why it's much more difficult. This is good, right? The skull protects the brain, but it's much, much more difficult to fracture the skull than it is some of your other bones. And you see like your feet down here, where you load on those bones a lot. You can see in your tibias and the head of the femur on either kind of end. You can see much, much less in your hands and your arms. And so areas that have more calcium in the bones are stronger. It's much more difficult for them to break. Have I told you guys the story? We broke the guy's femur. You had a spinal cord injury outside of the MRI machine when I was a PhD student. So we were doing, we had a grant from the NIH, and we were doing weight training in men and women that had spinal cord injuries. So we would strap weights on their ankles and have them sit in their wheelchair, and we would put these big electrodes on their thighs, and we would run electrical current into them. And because they can't feel anything, because they're paralyzed, we can turn the current way, way up, and it would make their muscle contract. And they would start off just with the weight of their leg, but then we would keep adding ankle weights, and they would do knee extensions, just like this. And so we could get, like this massive increase in muscle mass over the course of like 3 to 6 months in these people from doing all of this. Well, part of one of the things we were going to do was we were doing isometric contractions where their ankle was strapped down, and we were doing the stimulation of their quads, which puts a lot of pressure on the femur because you're trying to kick, but you can't. And because they've been in wheelchairs for a very, very long period of time, they've not had any weight borne on their femur, so they lose bone mineral density. Being a spinal cord injured person is like having osteoporosis, and we snapped the guy's femur. So from all of the force that was applied. Luckily, he did not feel it. He was like, cool. And we're like, no, not cool. Not cool. But we snapped his femur. We're like, whoops, that sounded bad. I mean, it sounded like a gunshot. And then we stuck him right in the magnet because one of the things we were measuring was you stim them and you can put them in the magnet and do a certain kind of imaging. We could tell what part of the muscle was being turned on by the electrical stimulation. Threw him in the magnet. We're like, yep, it's broken. They're like, okay. And they took him off to the other part of the hospital and sort of put in a little bit of a brace. We just had to wait. And he was fine. It healed back. He was okay.
Was there a lawsuit?
Oh, no.
Really?
They'd signed a consent form. They knew. They didn't care. So it was fine. So these folks tend to be, they were very interested in research, and they sort of knew, we're like, look, this stuff can happen or whatever. We can expect that to happen. But, he got free care at the place for, all those other kinds of things. Like we said, like, you couldn't feel it or anything. Not that that makes it okay, but, it was an honest mistake, but we broke a guy's femur. Okay? How many of you have broken a bone? Okay, almost all of you. Okay, think about where that bone was that you broke. Okay, so where was it? Heather, what bone did you break?
My pinky finger.
You broke the pinky finger.
That's it.
Okay, not a lot of bone mineral density in our pinky finger. Okay, who else? Who else wants to share? Zach, what'd you break? Some bone in your arm, like in your wrist, or?
No, man.
I mean, it's your radius or your ulna, right? It's one or the other.
It was probably the radius.
Okay. So I don't know which one is which. I can't tell you that, but I. Okay. Like this. Okay. Mitchell?
I fractured my skull.
Your skull.
Yeah.
Why weren't you wearing a helmet?
I was after my wisdom teeth surgery.
Okay. Did you just like fall down? Were you like riding a bike or a skateboard? Do you mind me asking? Were you in a car accident?
No. So I was just getting something to eat in the kitchen, and I was out on the floor, and I fell down.
You fell down.
Yeah. Fractured my skull.
Fractured your skull.
They were more worried about the concussion.
Yeah. Okay. Not great. Okay. But that's funny, right? Like you fell down and you fractured your skull. I've been hit in the head like full on with a line drive in baseball and no fracture. Concussion, yes. Fracture, no. Which is weird. Anybody else? Katie, what'd you break? Your foot? Ow. Okay. So I've only ever broken one bone as well, and I forget what the bone is, but I basically, the ligament where it connects on my thumb got torn off and pulled a chunk of the bone off. It's called an avulsion fracture. Actually, it was in this thumb. So we were playing intramural softball in my first job. I played with all of our students. And I tagged the guy out at second, and he slid into it, and it pushed my thumb in a weird way, his foot did, and it pulled the ligament off. And so that tells you things like you don't do those things in your femur or any place else because you have the connections are much stronger. You're always breaking your hands. People break, like I could kick you and break your fibula, like no problems, just break, snap, because the fibula bears almost no weight, but much, much more difficult. People break things here. You're always falling on your wrist and stuff. And so you tend to break bones that have lower bone mineral density, unless it's some kind of weird, crazy, catastrophic sort of thing. Okay? And so we can learn about some of those things through DEXA. You guys will see here, right, like your ribs don't have a lot of stuff. Anybody ever had like a cracked rib? No? My wife coughed so much a few years ago that she broke 3 ribs. She would tell you that was worse after all of that than anything that happened when she was pregnant. Any bit of anything. Now, admittedly, she didn't make it all the way to like full-on labor because our daughter's a crazy woman and was squeezing the umbilical cord. And we're like, nope, we're just going to go ahead and get her out. But yeah, rib fractures. Because every time you breathe, it hurts, right? Like if you sneeze, if you have to sneeze, and you have fractured ribs, like it's just like you just rather die. So anyway, but you can note that right from the way that this looks. That there's very, very little bone mineral density in comparison to the other things. Okay, we'll stop here for today. We'll pick up at the end of all of this, and then we'll start talking about health appraisal stuff on Wednesday as well.